Hi, I'm Ahava Tag. Today I'm joined by my ridiculously smart friend, Martha van Berkel, to talk to you about something you may not be thinking about, but you better be schema markup. You've got questions, we've got answers. Let's jump into it because we know that technology is taking over and search is really changing. And so one of the things we've been talking about a ton is, with search and AI is the rise in AI overviews. So tell me and tell everybody, how can healthcare marketers ensure that their content is accurately represented and prioritized when it comes to your genius of schema markup?
Sure. So let's just set the stage a little bit. So AI overviews is when sort of answers are being directly in search, right? So
Right.
it's giving the answers right there. It's not that different from the trend, or I'll say the consumer behavior we're seeing also in ChatGPT. So you really have to think about content at the center of it all, which is actually what you and I like to talk about, right? So before we get to schema markup, which I'll explain what that is, the content's at the center of it all. So how are, marketers, healthcare marketers specifically thinking about the content that they're writing and how it's answering these questions? And I'm very specific with regards to answering these questions. In fact, on our website, what we're seeing really work well is question, answer, right?
Correct.
And then more context and
100%.
more about that experience and how the health system or how one of your consumers who experienced your care came to that answer. Those things go together, but we're seeing that work very, very well. The other piece that's been really important is schema markup. So for those of you that don't know what that is, good news, I'm going to explain it. So think of this as when we translate something from English to Spanish. So we're thinking of translating it for humans that speak a different language. Schema markup is how we translate things into the language of search engines, or AI is using it too. And it's been around for a while. It's been around since 2011. It's a standard vocabulary. So it really is a language. And when you translate it, the machines can accurately figure out what that answer is. It's also way cheaper. And so, as we think about, I'll say the scaling and, the number of questions and answers and chats, and, we go to ChatGPT and even to Gemini and search now, we're not just putting in three keywords, right? We're having a conversation. So that's actually more queries, right? If you think of it accelerating. And so the search engines use this to have confidence and to basically compute more effectively as well.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. So I want to tell you, I just was on the phone with a client and he was saying to me for the first time in 10 years, our website traffic is dropping.
Yep.
And what does that mean? And I said to him, well, you know what it means? It means that they're looking for you on ChatGPT and they're looking for you on TikTok and they're looking for
Yeah.
you on Instagram. And you don't really have control over where the search starts anymore. There's way more choices than Google. And so you can't stop creating really great content because now you have another content beast to feed. And this content beast is smarter because you can say to it, how do I find a primary care physician who takes this insurance, who, has availability as soon as
Speak
possible?
Spanish, knows
Yeah,
about my
exactly.
specific.
Right, exactly. And that means your data has to be cleaner and more accurate than ever. So it doesn't mean the content is stopping. If anything, you need more of it and you need different kinds of it. You need video, you need infographics, you need things that are really going to explain things to people. And so one of the things we talked about is how do you do a good job of educating your stakeholders about not necessarily looking at where you show up on Google or where you show up here, but looking at how many times is ChatGPT hitting your website to scrape it for content. So what would you say to a client who said to you, how do I explain this to a stakeholder that the old ways of measuring things are now different?
Oh, the measurement is such a changing piece. And I think the hardest part are leaders who are well, of course we're going to try aim for 10% more next year, right? And the data saying we're, 34% less clicks are getting to websites. And so the numbers are changing. So where we would look at, visibility, how we define visibility is truly that is it showing up in Google? Now, Google's great. They're not even giving us a measurement to do AIO. So we have to use other tools that are scraping and kind of giving that visibility. ChatGPT is another really hard one. There is some brand visibility metrics there, but I think what we need to explain to them. So when I introduce myself, I talk about how I used to drive this 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase. And then Losing Chase was directed by Kevin Bacon. And the reason I share this is because you've just figured out you can win the Kevin Bacon game because you know me and I used to drive the car and Kevin Bacon used to drive the car, right? We sat in the same seat. We made this happen. And the reason you figured that out is because you inferred from the data and from understanding the context or the relationships between that data that you can win. And so when I try to explain this to executives, I'm like, so what we need to do is like, we need to have really amazing content, right? Remember, content's at the center of it. And then we need to bring context so that those answers that are going to drive visibility can be connected by the machines that are doing it. Now, good news, schema markup is how you bring that context to
Right.
your content. And that context is what allows these machines to do accurate inferencing. So in this world of changing metrics, yes, I think like we have to just accept that like our behaviors are changing, right? If our behaviors are changing, consumer behaviors are changing. I do think social actually plays a really different role. I'm not an expert in that, but I'm seeing lots of data around how different demographics, like different age groups, are like
Yes.
finding health information on these different platforms. So I think that's a huge opportunity, especially for first movers. And then the other piece is like, make sure your content and your data is exactly how you want it to have, because that's going to drive, the success, that conversion. And this is actually to go back to what I'm excited about in all absence of early indicators or top of funnel things, because all the top of funnel things are going away, right? They're fractured. People are searching and discovering things other places. The conversion is still happening on your site.
That's
And
right.
so the
And
appointments
they're
book,
highly qualified. They're
and
way
they're
more highly
highly qualified.
qualified than they used to be. 100%.
So in absence, I think in this time of change, this time where there's just like so many things we don't have answers to, like I wish I could be like, great, use this tool. Like you're going to figure out all the visibility metrics. Like they're changing so fast and they're kind of vague. Some of the ones that are out there that like work on conversions. Center your business and your goals and your team around how are we optimizing for those conversions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So here's a question we got in our mailbag. And this is a question that makes a lot of sense to me because there's a lot of fighting that goes on about this question. There's often confusion or tension around who should own technical SEO initiatives like Schema Markup. In your view, who should take the lead, marketing, IT, or both? And how can those teams align on the why behind structured data so it's not just seen as a technical checkbox, but a strategic initiative?
I'll start with the last piece first. Like, what is the outcome? Well, we're all working as one team for the business outcome, that conversion, right? So I think like anytime we work with customers, we work with a lot of healthcare organizations, what is it that you're trying to move the needle on? It could be, getting appointments booked. It could be in certain service lines that you're trying to like increase because you have access there that you want to
Commercially
like
insured patients, it's always the same. That's what they're looking for.
exactly.
Commercially insured patients.
So what, and then you work backwards. So it's like, where are those commercially insured patients? Like, what are they looking for? Right. So, and it starts in the content. So what content are they looking for? So when I get this question around, like, is it a marketing or IT? So it's always a partnership, but I do think it's a business outcome we're driving towards. And therefore I do typically put it in marketing and not in IT, mostly because IT is thinking of like, how are we going to do it? And I do think the marketing team is like, what do we need to do? They're coming up with the strategy, they're coming up with the outcomes, they're connecting with the patient stories, they're working on the content. The structured data is like what you then like what you translate all that beautiful stuff to. So whether you're doing that in-house and IT is going to partner with you to do it, or you are working with a vendor such as Schema App, like us, like, that's where we would then kind of partner, just like IT would partner to make it happen. But the strategy and what you want to do should live in marketing.
So you would help make friends.
I would help make friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. You and I both met in the hospital space where we've done a lot of work in consulting, but you and I also have significant practices within B2B medical, the healthcare world, or just B2B in general. Tech.
Yes.
So what do you think they should be thinking about when it comes to schema markup and AI search?
Like the broader kind of
Uh-huh.
audiences, it's not that different, to be honest. Like I do think like where I would say, if I were to say like the innovators in that group, like the first movers, and I would actually say like the innovators are typically B2B tech, finance and healthcare, which are two of the verticals we work closely with. E-commerce also tend to be the innovators.
Right.
Like they're thinking of schema markup more than just, so it's this translation engine. It also provides higher click-through rate when you get stars in search. So think of your physician profiles, like getting stars, like
Right.
those
Review.
convert significantly higher, sometimes twice the click-through rate, like with some
By the way,
numbers I saw.
millennials care more about ratings and reviews than anything else online.
So
Whereas
wild.
Gen Z wants to find it on TikTok.
Well, and my other question is like, what else do you have ratings and reviews about that like you should be
Right.
talking about? Like, could you
Right.
talk about service lines? Could you talk about hospitals? Like, I know we don't like to talk about that stuff, but like that's being opportunistic around like standing out in search, again, getting that visibility so you can get that conversion.
You
But
know
when you're
what? I
talking about,
remember I remember when we fought about this about reviewing doctors, and it was like, guys, you got to do it. Sorry, you just got to do it. And there's something about that also. Like there just has to be a way to convince people that those things are going to get you ahead. If they're
So being opportunistic, right? So I
being
guess my point is like on all the things that Google says you can do to get higher click-through rate in this world of like 0 clicks, like go do those things. They've been around for a decade. Like, so that's like not what the innovators are doing, but like where the opportunity is. Where the innovators are doing are asking questions like, how do I use the schema markup to learn about my content? So schema markup's one thing. Entity SEO is like this next thing that we're talking about, which I love Ahava because it plays to topics, right? Which is like, at the center of writing and at the center of
right,
content. But like how coverage of topics, like how are you thinking about that? Taxonomies actually came up in an article I was reading yesterday. Like, is your content really structured? And then, how are you using schema markup or kind of thinking about how the schema markup tells you more about your topics, tells you more about your coverage.
right,
And then the last place, and I would say like where our lead users that work with us are, is we're trying to figure out how we use a schema markup to accelerate AI initiatives within the organization, on-site search, and then AI initiatives like chat bots and so forth. And how do they use that knowledge graph, which is sort of when I was explaining me and Kevin Bacon and how things are connected, or like what I like, if I generalize it, a data layer, like how is that data that you've already done for all your marketing needs now sort of being reused by the whole enterprise to accelerate? Because the article I read in February was like CIO's biggest challenge is to have data that's ready to be used for AI. And when you do structured data, you get all that, good click juice, good visibility, but you also are preparing the data in a really structured way,
right.
which is what robots like. So that's what I would say the innovators, how they're thinking about it.
Okay. So I want to ask you another question because everything you've talked about is old. Every single thing, schema mark, all this stuff has been around for at
For a
least
while.
years. Entity, SEO,
I'm not getting younger.
all right, right, all of it. Why all of a sudden is everybody excited about it now? Like, why didn't they do this when it first started and they knew that they needed to make these clarifications between their data and their content?
So one, I think it's hard. Like it's not when they produced the vocabulary in 2011, my, genius co-founder who speaks semantic technology was like, oh my goodness, I totally understand why they do it this way. But like he's very unique in that like he could kind of understand it and see it that way. So I think it's hard and it's not been something that it requires collaboration, right, between marketing and IT. So I think that's why people haven't done it. I think now where I would say like we're in mainstream, if you think of like adoption, Google in March and Microsoft stood on stage and was like, we're using structured data for all of our generative AI. And
And that's
so,
it. And there it is.
like, so it's like, don't believe Martha anymore. I've been
Right.
saying this for years, but believe them. And I think they're doing it because it makes them more cost effective. And much as people talk about the perplexities, ChatGPT is leveraging Bing's knowledge graph,
Right.
by the way. So
Right.
like their partners, and Microsoft and Google are doing this at a scale no one else is at yet. And so if they're like, if this gives us accuracy, it makes it less expensive, that makes total sense to me,
Yeah,
right? Like
but
this is like the
it doesn't always provide accuracy, and that's what's so interesting about it. But there's bad things on the web, and it doesn't necessarily know how to tell the difference between those things. So
Yeah, Gen AI doesn't. So they use structured data to kind of ground them. So there's a ton of research about how knowledge graphs, which is like when we connect this data and large language models, knowledge graphs are like, there's a ton of research how they make large language models up to 300% more accurate because of how they're structured. So
right,
that's sort of like, again, all the hypotheses I've had over the years, I was saying like, this just makes so much sense. I think that's where these things come together. And even the week they announced that they were like, we're using structured data for Gen AI, they also Google and OpenAI said they're going to adopt this new standard called MCP. It's called Model Context Protocol, but it's like a standard for consuming data with context. Guess what? Structured data is data with context.
exactly
So
right.
are they going to just turn structured data into MCP? Like probably. So I just think that those are like some of the things new in the world that are pulling people forward. And I think now more than ever, put on your like think of it like a product marketer, think opportunistically. If you're in healthcare, like you still have advantage if you just adopt and move quickly.
Yeah, I think that that's not what healthcare is good at, though.
No,
We don't adopt quickly and we don't move quickly, but we have
but
to.
there are, I would say, innovators in healthcare and going in. It's just going to take, the organizations themselves
Yes.
need to be thinking about how do they meet their consumers. And that's, I think, where, there is some urgency.
Yes, and I
Um,
think that the CMOs and the directors of digital strategy are smarter than ever, and they're saying,
yeah.
we have to do this because otherwise you just won't, nobody's going to find us. They're not
Yeah.
going to find us anywhere. Like forget about, TikTok, like they won't find us on Google, they won't find us on ChatGPT. Martha, can you share an example of how implementing schema markup has led to measurable improvements in search visibility or patient engagement for a healthcare organization?
I loved your question about patient engagement because I don't have good metrics on that. Usually our partners, like they would have that, but we can look at like the top of funnel things that lead to getting quality traffic on the site. And these are changing, right? So as per our earlier conversation, like we can't just keep measuring the same things, but let's go through like what we measure today. And maybe I'll share also where I think it's going. One is that click-through rate on rich results. So very specifically when you achieve like the star ratings on physicians, there's job posting ones, there's ones for events. We very specifically look at like the click-through rate for those. And they typically, especially physicians, get a significantly higher click-through rate when you achieve that result. So click-through rate on anything that we're achieving like a rich result on is like the primary measure. And we have lots of case studies on sort of how that looks. But like the numbers I saw last week was like double the click-through rate.
It makes sense.
Like
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just,
6% on regular, 12% if the ratings there.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I love those because it's like it's still delivering and it's easy. Like that's the easy part.
Right.
The
Right.
second thing we look at is over the last couple of years, we've been looking at non-branded queries. So again, if you actually I'll say like in your schema markup, you actually add additional data about like what is the article mentioning or what is it about, or I'm being really clear about which city it's the service or the service line of the hospital is in. We are actually able to see once we do, and this is just like adding what we call entity linking within schema markup. We see it actually move the needle on non-branded queries. So queries
It's
that
very
like
important.
yeah, so like physicians near me or physician in Jacksonville or
Right.
physician in Texas or wherever those
Right.
elements are. So that's another one. And again, we're looking at, impressions, clicks, and then it would be traffic would be what you would look at, visits, and then conversion on the site. So we do see that move the needle. Then we've recently been starting to measure AIO. So like, are we seeing more citations and mentions in AI overviews? This data is typically out of like a metrics platform like a Conductor, a BrightEdge, a SEMrush,
Sure.
Ahrefs also. But we are seeing after we do robust schema markup that the AIO is increasing. So more citations, more mentions. I don't have like a macro number on like the size of that because it's just like a brand new measure that we've been doing. And then the next thing we'll be measuring is around sort of like coverage of entities or topics across the site. So we'll start being able to then connect that back to these other metrics to say, if you're doing a really good job talking about, I don't know, let's say a specialty within cardiology, are we then seeing traffic on those pages increase after we sort of increase the coverage of that across the site, as well as the connectedness and content, like in context with hospitals, physicians, et cetera, who are related to those things. So that's what's next. Ask me in 6 months, and then I'll be able to report on that.
All right. We'll do this again in 6 months. I'm so excited. Martha, where can people find you?
Sure. So if you want to know more about Schema App, www.schemaapp.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to connect. Ask me questions. I'm happy to be your resource.
Martha, thank you so much for being here. As you can see, Martha is super fun and full of knowledge. So if you want to reach out to her, please do so. Thanks to you for joining us. I hope you got the answer you needed today. If you have a burning question, put it in the comments or email it to me at ahava.leaptag@ahamediagroup.com. I'll see you next time.